Well, today we're kicking off a brand new series, you know this, right, called Are We There Yet? And here's the thing, we're going to be talking about what it looks like to live in seasons of waiting, right? Like in seasons where we're actually sitting and waiting. And the thing I would bet is true of many of us in many parts of life. Sometimes we're looking forward to something, but many times, like the hardest thing to do, right, is to wait, right? Like whether it's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing, like you're just like, come on, can we please hurry up and get to that? I don't know about you, but I absolutely like hate to wait. A few years ago, we went to Disney World for the first time, and it might be the only time after we got back from, I don't know, right? But we went to Disney World for the first time with a bunch of people and stayed for a little while. And there was somebody in our family, like a cousin, who knew like the whole FastPass system. Anybody else like get the FastPass system? Like FastPass was made for people like me. I don't even know. Like, and she was like the best person in the crew. She was still in her 20s, so she knew how to use internet, you know? It was like, hey, here, we're gonna go ride this. We're gonna go ride that. And I'll be honest with you, like she was taking me to ride things that I really didn't want to ride that much. And I was not riding some things that I actually really wanted to ride, but I didn't really care all that much. You know why? Because I didn't have to wait, right? I need a haircut all week. I don't know if you guys like this. I need a haircut all week, right? It was like way overdue for a cut, and I got like the Great Clips app on my phone. Anybody else use the Great Clips app? Quick endorsement. There we go. More of you out there than I realized. Great Clips gets a little endorsement today, right? I use the app because I can look on there and I can see what the wait time is, you know? And all week long, I've been avoiding Great Clips because I think every high school senior got their haircut this week at Great Clips. I'm pretty sure is what happened because every week, every day, the wait's like an hour long. And then finally yesterday, after they all graduated, 15 minutes. And so I went in, and like I used the app, and I go to Great Clips, not because like I have like a great, perfect hairstylist who I love, because it's a different person every time, and not because, I'm in love with every single cut that I walk out with, because it kind of feels, it just varies, varies a little bit, but I go because I don't have to wait, right? You're with me, you get it. Now, here's the thing about waiting, right? Waiting a lot of times for us begins, at least, you talked about this a second ago, Gretchen, waiting for a lot of us begins with some sense of anticipation, right? Like a lot of the times we're actually a little bit excited for the thing that we're waiting for, even if there's some anxiety that goes with it. Like we're actually like, even a new season that comes with maybe a loss or a little bit of a turmoil or like a bit of an upset, and now we've got to wait for something new to come in. There's a bit of us that still gets somewhat like hopeful and excited for what could be in that season, right? It always turns into anticipation, right? Or begins with anticipation. Several years ago, I was like right out of college. I was getting ready to go to a conference in D.C. I was living in Atlanta at the time, was going to a conference in Washington, D.C. It was like a really exciting thing for me. It'd been, I was kind of like right out of college. So the fact that I could like go to a conference, felt like a very mature thing to do, And so I was excited about traveling and doing that. And, like I'm gonna have to go to the airport, I'm gonna have to wait at the airport. But a lot of times, you sit and you wait at the airport and like you're waiting, but you're also anticipating because you're excited for the thing that comes on the other side of that wait. Well, in this particular experience, I'd lined up a ride to the airport with a friend. I was going to meet him at his office, and we were going to drive down there. It was a Friday afternoon, my flight was. We hop in the car, we get on the loop that goes around Atlanta to get to the airport, and I don't know if you've driven in Atlanta before, but on Friday, rush hour in Atlanta starts around 1:15, plus or minus, And so we start heading to the airport. Well, we didn't account for the fact that it's Friday. We didn't account that rush hour was already kind of in the works. And we found ourselves kind of like sitting and waiting in traffic, and that wasn't really an exciting experience for me, as you know. And so we finally make it to the airport, but by the time we get to the airport, I've got 45 minutes to my flight. Now, for me, I'm the kind of person who kind of just gets to the airport about an hour before a flight anyway. Anybody else like that? Like, I'm okay cutting it close, because the last thing I want to do is sit there and wait, right? And so I'm like, I cut it close a little bit. So for me, 45 minutes, I only got 15 minutes to make up here. I'm going to be fine. So I roll in. I've got one bag to check because I had to take suits to this conference, which again, felt very weird to me, but also very mature for me as a recent college graduate. I'm going to wear suits. And so I've got a rolling duffel bag looking very professional into the airport, but I've got to check this thing. And so I get in line to check my bag at the counter. About 10 minutes later, I get to the counter. I look at the lady. I go to check into my flight. She pulls up my information. She goes, I can't take your bag less than a half hour before your flight. To which I'm like, well, I wish I'd known that 10 minutes ago, because I'd already boogied on down to TSA right there. I said, well, what do I do? I got to have my suits In DC, what am I going to do with this? She goes, well, you can take it with you through the TSA line. I didn't even know you could do that. I thought like the big bags weren't allowed, And so they're just like, no, you can take it with you through the TSA line and check at the gate. I'm like, great, game on, I'm going. So I get to the TSA line. Well, now I got to make a decision. Which TSA line should I get in? Anybody else play that game? Like, you kind of scope out the situation. There's a lot of factors involved. How many people are in the line? Who's in the line? You're kind of like processing through, like, do they look like a quick mover or a slow mover? Do they look like they know how to take their shoes off efficiently or not? You know what I mean? Like, there's always the person who waits to the very last minute. And then they're like, oh, I got quarters. Like, who carries those? You know what I mean? And they're like, I'm like doing everything, right? Like, come on, let's go. So like, you're like kind of scoping out the lines, right? Well, I scope out the lines. It's kind of like checking out the grocery store on steroids. And I'm like, okay, this is my line. This is the one I'm getting in. I think this one's good. Well, I get in the line and I go follow the line. About 5 minutes in, I go around a corner that I think is the end of the line. The corner is not the end of the line. The corner is just the start of the line. And I was in like the pre-line to get to the line. Well, now I'm like really stuck in this thing. Now, you know those people who get in a line at TSA and they go, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm running late for a flight. Can I go past you? Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm running late for a flight. Can I go past you? Excuse me, I'm sorry. Like, I can't stand those people. Like, those people drive me crazy. I'm like, we should probably plan ahead. Should have thought about this thing. Does anyone here look like they've got time to kill? Like, do we look like we're doing this for entertainment? Like, come on, we're all in the same boat here. You're in line like everyone else. I hate that guy. I'll tell you, I try to be a person who lives from the values that I have, right? And so I refuse to be that guy. And so everything in me wanted to be that guy, but I refused to be that guy. I'm like, I've made my bed, I'm gonna sleep in it, Like, I'm gonna work my way through this line. So I get through the line. I finally work my way through there. I'm throwing my shoes on real fast. I've got about 10 minutes to catch a flight in the Atlanta airport. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Atlanta airport. Anybody ever flown through Atlanta before? Perfect, a lot of you, because it's a big airport. It's not a small thing to navigate. And TSA is in like one end, and then I've got to get to the other end to catch my flight. Now, they do kind of try to make things easier in Atlanta. If you've been to Atlanta, you get to ride on the what? The plane train. It's a very cute name for a train. The plane train, right? So I go down the escalator, and I look at the train. There's a train there with a lot of people on it. And then there's a tunnel. And there's a tunnel that goes right next to the train all the way. And now I have to make a decision to make. Do I feel like it'd be faster to ride the train or race the train? And in a moment of panic, I actually allowed myself to believe that there's a shot that I might be faster than a train. And so me and my rolling duffel bag, we just took off. You know what I mean? Like, we're just booking it 3 gates worth down this tunnel, racing the train. And I'm looking ahead every time I get to the next stop. Did I beat the train? Did I beat the train? Did I beat the train? Did I beat the train, right? And so I'm booking it, and I'm huffing, and I'm rolling. I'm trying to beat this train. I get to my gate, or I get to my terminal. I go up the escalator. I run down the hall. I get to an empty gate. And with all the seriousness in the world, standing at an empty gate, I looked at the gate agent, and I said, did the train leave or plane leave yet? Like, no one's around. It's dead empty, right? Like, I'm expecting her to look at me and be like, well, actually, everybody's hiding. We're going to jump out. Surprise you. We're still here. She goes, yeah, I left 5 minutes ago. And what began as a wait of anticipation turned into me going from gate to gate to gate 3 different times to fly standby. Turns out Atlanta and DC are both pretty popular areas to travel to. And so I go gate to gate on standby, and a day that started with anticipation ended with me calling that same friend who dropped me off at about 11 o'clock at night and saying, hey, what you doing? And what started as anticipation turned into a day of anxiety, right? That then turned in time into a day of frustration, because I then just couldn't stand myself, for being that late and having to wait. Which then turned into a day of despair, which felt like I'm never going to get there. No. This journey is fine for a day, right? But when this journey turns into a week, or maybe even a season, it comes to feel a little bit different, right? Like, when this is the journey of a career, that is interrupted by a job loss, that starts with the anticipation of what might be next, that turns into the anxiety that that next thing's not there yet, which then turns into frustration that I'm still here, and then maybe even at times turns into the despair and the hopelessness of, will I ever move past this season? It feels a little bit different. Or when this is the journey of a promotion that was supposed to happen a year ago. Or when you've ended a relationship with the expectation that another relationship might be right around the corner for you. And then that new relationship doesn't happen as quickly as you thought it might, right? It feels a little bit different. Or when this is a health crisis in your life, that at first was going to be a quick fix, but yet for some reason is still with you, right? Or when this is a big decision that you made with the expectation and the anticipation that something good was going to be on the other side of it for you, but that something good hasn't shown up yet, all of this begins to feel a little bit different. And you actually, I don't know about you, but you actually can start to feel maybe even a little bit embarrassed by some of the decisions that you've made, or by the fact that you're still in this season, or by the fact that it hasn't finished or kind of come to fruition or all worked out for you. And that's a lot to carry, and that's a lot to sort through, and that's a lot to figure out. There's a story the Jewish people tell, and we get to share it today. That really is about kind of the founder of their movement and their group of people that became, in time, Christianity for us. There's a story that they tell about their founder who actually himself experienced a season of waiting, a guy named Abraham. Many of you have heard this story, right? Abraham was a guy who was called out by God from his people and from his family to go, and actually he was told to go to a land that he would be shown, right? And he was promised that in going to this land that he would be shown, he and his wife, right? God said, I will make a great nation of you, or I'll make of you a great nation, that they would actually, by leaving one season and one chapter and one group of people and going out themselves, they actually would become a new group of people and a new nation that God would use to actually bless the whole world. And God said to them, hey, I will make of you a great nation. Now, this implies or requires, like, hey, you're going to have kids, and those kids are going to have so many kids, and those kids are going to have so many kids, and those kids are going to have so many kids, that one day, Abraham, you actually, this step that you're taking will actually turn into a whole new group of people and a whole new nation. Now, they stepped out. And over time, they experienced some things and experienced some of God's goodness, and they experienced some faithfulness, but the one thing they didn't experience was having kids. In fact, they weren't able to have kids at all. And years later after not being able to have kids, God shows back up to Abraham, and he's talking with him, and he says to Abraham, hey, I'm going to come visit you next year, and by this time next year, you're going to have a kid. And when he said this, Abraham's wife, Sarah, was a little bit away in a tent. She actually just laughed. And God says to Sarah, why did you laugh? And Sarah says, I didn't laugh. I mean, like, how are you going to explain to God why you laughed at God? You know what I mean? She's like, I didn't laugh. And God basically was like, yeah, you did. You laughed, you know? But that was her response. And yet, sure enough, a year later, they had a kid. But it wasn't until 25 years had passed since they had been given the promise that they would become a great nation. Now, 25 years is a long time, but quite honestly, like, many of us have experienced things in our life and waiting seasons in our life that whether or not they lasted 25 years, maybe kind of felt like 25 years, because at some point, like, the number doesn't matter anymore, right? At some point, it's not 10 years or 20 years or 25 years or last week or next month. Or like, at some point, the number is irrelevant. It just becomes forever, right? Like, at some point, it just feels like forever. Many of you have heard me talk about this. When I was just a few years out of college, I actually experienced a job loss that kind of came out of nowhere. We didn't expect it. The organization was downsizing, and I was cut without any kind of expectation or any kind of warning. And 14 months went by before I found the next long-term place of work for me. And by the time that, like, 10 months came by, it didn't matter if it was 10 months or 14 months or 15 months or 25 years, right? Like, it just felt like forever. And you've had moments in your life, seasons in your life, where it didn't matter at that point, like, how long it had been. It just felt like it was never going to end, right? Which all begs us kind of the question, kind of ask the question, right? Like, why would God waste all of that time in their life why would God waste all that time in my life? And why would God waste all that time in your life as well? No. Many of us will tell ourselves, and like maybe even heard, especially if you grew up around church, maybe you heard this, someone told you this, or you just tell yourself this to kind of like feel better in difficult seasons or in waiting seasons, right? Like we'll tell ourselves, hey, like the reason we're waiting, the reason this is taking so long, the reason we're still in it, right, is maybe, just maybe God is trying to teach us something, right? Like maybe God's actually trying to teach you a lesson or prove something to you or get you to learn something, right? Others of us maybe even feel like, hey, maybe there's like a punishment in this for us, right? And so because I did something I shouldn't have done, or maybe something happened, right? Like, and God's trying to punish me and teach me a lesson in this season, right? I believe seasons of waiting actually go way deeper than that. In fact, about 2,000 years after Abraham and Sarah finally had a kid, one of the earliest leaders in the Christian movement, a guy named Paul, who planted a bunch of churches, started a bunch of churches, and then wrote letters to those churches to encourage them in this new faith of Christianity at the time. He actually took some time in one of his letters written to the church in Rome to unpack for them another level of understanding behind Abraham and Sarah's waiting. And what he said, I believe, shifted the way that they might have thought about that, and I believe could shift the way that we think about it as well. Here's what he said. Paul wrote this. He said, in hope, he, or Abraham, believed against hope. In other words, he believed against all odds, right? Like against all reasonable hope, he continued to hope that he should become the father of many nations. As he has been told, so shall your offspring be. So he did not weaken in faith when he considered his own body, which was as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, very kind of Paul to kind of put it that way, right? Or when he considered the barrenness of Sarah's womb, he said, no unbelief made him waver concerning the promise of God. But he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God, fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised. Now notice real quick, he says that Abraham grew strong. Not that Abraham was strong. Not that Abraham, right, was given strength even, but that through this season of waiting, Abraham actually grew strong in his faith. Now, Paul continues to write another paragraph or so about Abraham and Sarah and just unpack that for them. You should definitely take time to read that. I encourage it. But then shortly after that, right after he finishes unpacking Abraham and Sarah's faith and the depth of their faith and the weight of their faith and what God was doing in that season for them, he then turns and begins to speak directly to the Christians in Rome in ways that would have challenged their own thinking, in ways that I believe, if we would lean into his words, would actually challenge our own thinking as well. He says this, right out of the gate, which kind of feels counterintuitive. He says, we rejoice in our sufferings, to which his audience would have been like, what do you mean we rejoice in our sufferings? Like, there's no joy in suffering. Suffering is just suffering. Like, we just want to get out of what we're in. We want to get away from the weight that we're holding. We want to get out from this season of waiting for what's next, right? Like, we don't rejoice in our suffering. He goes, no, you rejoice in your suffering. Why? He goes, because you know that suffering produces endurance. In other words, the ability to journey through something for longer. Right? And endurance produces character. Right? The values and the virtues by which you make decisions and that drive you in life. He says, and character produces hope. In other words, an optimistic perspective, right? The expectation that something good will come here. Now, something interesting to me about these three things that he talks about. He talks about endurance, he talks about character, he talks about hope. These aren't things that you learn, right? Like if you've ever talked to a runner or been a runner, you know that you can't teach someone endurance, right? Like I can't sit you in a classroom and talk to you about what endurance is and teach it to you, right? The only way to develop endurance is to run further than you ran the last time, for longer than you ran the last time, right? I can't teach it to you. It's something that's developed in you, right? And you can't learn character. I mean, like we teach character education in schools, and it's a great thing, right? But at the end of the day, your character isn't formed by learning a set of definitions, right, about what different words mean. Your character is formed in the hardest moments of your life where you have to make decisions that determine the kind of person that you are and the kind of person who you're going to be, right? And your character is only formed by making harder decisions than you made the last time that put your character on the line and force you again to make another hard decision in another difficult circumstance about the type of person who you're going to be. You can't learn it. You can learn the definitions, but you can't actually learn it. You can only develop it. through experience, right? And hope, you can't learn hope. We can talk about hope. We can define hope, right? But you can't sit and learn hope. It's only developed by going through circumstances where you need it and then finding that maybe you have it. Now, Paul says something interesting, particularly about hope in his letter, right after this. He talks about hope and he really starts to unpack that. And I think it's pretty significant. He says, hope does not put us to shame, which is an interesting thing. But think about this for a second, right? Like, haven't there been moments in life for you where you actually were embarrassed to hope? Like, you actually felt foolish to continue hoping for the thing that you'd hoped for a while, and at some point your hope ran out, partly because you go, I'm an idiot for believing that this might still be possible. There's a piece of you that at some point feels foolish. In fact, I bet there's friends in your life, people you know, who everyone around looks at them and goes, why are you still holding out for that, right? Like, he's not coming back, or it's not going to happen, or I know you have a dream of doing this one day, but man, like, it's been decades. At some point, you've got to let it go. At some point, you've got to stop hoping. You're actually embarrassed for them that they would still hope. But Paul says, no, like, hey, listen, hope doesn't put us to shame. No. Because the kind of hope that Paul's talking about is different than the kind of hope that you and I usually hold on to. And it's rooted in something different than we usually place our hope in. In fact, he says this. He says, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. In other words, the hope that we put or hold on to in life, right? The place we find our hope isn't rooted in the expectation that we have for the season that we're in. It's not rooted in the thing that we're longing for and desiring. It's not rooted in the thing that we're hoping finally shows up for us, but it's actually rooted in the love of God that's poured into our hearts continually, right? You know, the most valuable thing I believe you could learn in a season of waiting or discover in a season of waiting is a greater awareness of God's love for you, regardless of whether or not the thing that you hope for actually shows up for you. Regardless of whether or not you get there, regardless of whether or not you achieve it, regardless of whether or not you get it, regardless of whether or not you achieve that status, regardless of whether or not that problem is resolved, right? God's love for you is based on none of that, but simply on the fact that he made you. And it's as if Paul is anticipating us asking the question, how do I know that God would actually love me just for me? He said this immediately following. He goes, for while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. In other words, before we even knew we needed it, before we even knew what we were looking for and waiting for, God in his wisdom went out of his way to actually send his son to us into a system that believed that in order to be right with God, you actually had to sacrifice something to God and give it to him, right? For you to be in right standing with him. And God sent his son to us who actually sacrificed himself for us so that we could know that there was nothing left for us to do. There was nothing left for us to achieve. There was nothing left for us to wait for in order to be in right standing with him. And this, if you're new to faith or just hanging with us, you're just starting to check out the code, like this is the cornerstone of our faith. This is the pinnacle of what we build our lives upon. You know the greatest thing I think you could develop in a season of waiting, right? A greater awareness of what Christ did for you and a greater awareness of God's love for you that actually becomes the source of your hope. Not the circumstances around you, not the thing you're waiting for, right? But that would actually become the source of your hope. That's built on the character that's growing within you, that flows from the endurance that's being developed within you, right? Because of the season that you're in. Why? Because some things can't be taught. Some things can only be developed. Right? And here's the thing. Those seasons of waiting for us, those seasons of holding out, those seasons of hoping that it might finally come, right? Those seasons of waiting aren't wasted, right? When we actually focus on developing within. when we actually recognize that God might be doing something in us before he does something beyond us, when we actually recognize that what's happening in us might be worth more than the thing we're waiting for, those are the seasons that actually make waiting worth it. And those are the seasons I truly believe that we grow the most. Let me just say this real quick before we wrap up. There's any piece of you that finds yourself in a season of waiting. There's any piece of you that finds yourself looking and hoping for the next thing to come. 3 things I'd offer for you real quick. First, focus on who more than when. Focus on who you're becoming more than when that thing might actually become resolved in your life. Right? Second, this, reconsider maybe the source of your hope. You find yourself hoping most in the thing that you need to get resolved or desire to be resolved, the outcome of the situation, right? Or is this actually a season where you might find a deeper source of hope to build your life upon? And thirdly, this, I'd encourage to engage in a way that your future self will appreciate. Engage in a way that your future self will appreciate, because here's the thing. There's going to be a day when this season ends for you. And there's going to be a time when you look back on this season. And at that time, you're going to ask yourself, did I actually use the season to grow in the ways that I was intended to grow and made to grow? Or did I just get through and survive it? And I genuinely believe this. If you will lean in to a season like this with an openness for what God might not teach you, but actually develop within you, there's going to be a piece of your future self that looks back on yourself today and goes, man, I wouldn't wish that season on anyone. But I am so glad for it, because I am different today because of what happened within me in a season where I was waiting on everything outside of me to change. Why? You know this, because, come on, waiting isn't wasted when you actually take the time to develop within. And that doesn't happen on your own. That doesn't happen just through a couple TED Talks and a few good books, though I love both of them, right? The deepest piece of that doesn't happen until you actually lean into the God who made you. The God who, before you were waiting, was actually acting on your behalf. And long after this season, and even long after this life, will be providing hope for you day after day after day. When you lean into that, you don't just learn new skills. You don't just learn new techniques. You don't just learn new discipline, and I'm all for discipline. Will you actually discover there are a set of things that are developed within you that nothing else could have given you except for a season of waiting? Let's pray together before we wrap up. God, I thank you for the seasons in my life that I worked so hard to run from. God, there were times and moments where I just wanted to get out of that chapter and turn the page as fast as I possibly could to the next one. But God, I look back and I can't help but see your care. I can't help but see your intentionality. I can't help but see the ways that you wanted something more for me than just the end of that season. And God, I know that's true for every person in this room. God, for those of us who find ourselves today stuck in a season of waiting, feeling like, man, this may never end. God, would you help us to discover maybe even just a hint of gratitude? God, maybe even just a hint of expectation, not for what might come of this season beyond us, but what you might actually be doing within us. God, for the person who's just tired, who just finds himself out of breath, God, I pray that you would help them to discover another level of endurance that doesn't come from their own grit and grip, but comes from leaning in further to you and discovering more of your love for them. God, for the person who's on the brink of having to make a decision, maybe a decision that could end this season for them. They waver and they waffle about what the right thing to do is or what the right way forward is. God, would you give them a greater level of character in that moment of decision? God, would you strengthen the values that drive them? Help them to make decisions that they'll be proud of as they continue to grow and become more the person you've made them to be. God, for the person who finds himself depleted of hope, not just wishing the season would end, but feeling like that never will end and having zero expectation that it ever will. God, for the person who just feels stuck. God, I pray that you would provide another level of hope that they've yet to experience. But God, this time, would you give us a hope that isn't based on ourselves? Would you give us a hope that isn't even based on the season? But God, would you give us a hope that's based on you and your love for us, a love that went so far to give yourself up for us so that we could lean into you, that we could have hope, so that we could trust you with our hardest seasons, knowing that you've done the hardest thing already for us. And we love you. We thank you for this. And we expect you to use these seasons in our lives to develop us into the people who you've called us to be. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.